Hi there, Paul Thomson here from Spitfire Audio. I'm going to talk you through my demo for Abbey Road 1 Orchestral Foundations and some of the decisions I made while I was writing it. The demo is called Journey Across the Red Planet. You can hear it on the website on the product page for Abbey Road 1. And you can hear a fantastic mix that Simon Rhodes did for me on that. For the purposes of this, we're just listening to my rough monitor mix, which I had up while I was working in Logic. So the shape of the piece, how it developed, I started off with wanted to start off with a little bit of a mysterious opening and then into some kind of nice action stuff, kind of heroic kind of feel. And then I got to a bit of doing a percussion break. I got a little bit stuck there, sent it to Christian. He gave me the suggestion he said, why don't you do something like a Princess Leia type bit and then come back to the beginning bit, but angrier. So absolutely brilliant suggestions. And so there we go. So that's how I built it. So let's have a look at the opening first up. Okay, so you can hear what's going on here. We've got a couple of different parts. In the strings, I've got two tremolo parts, and I'm doing those, and I'm doing it's a combination of a bowed tremolo and effectively a very slow fingered tremolo. So I'm changing the notes. You can just see that there in the part. And if I solo these two parts, so it's really just a very kind of gradual swell and then dying away. And if we look at the way that I'm moving the modulation and the expression, you can see there's slightly more movement in the low strings than there is in the high strings. As you can see there, I'm coming up slightly more in the low strings, but it's really just finding the balance by ear. As you can see, the expression on both of these as well, I'm moving. So just to remind you, the modulation controls where you are in the dynamic range, the recorded dynamic range. So whether you're going from the very quietest recorded samples all the way through to the very loudest recorded samples. But expression is like an overall volume control just for this one sound. And it gives you an extra degree of musicality, of ability to kind of craft the sound that you're hearing. So both very, very useful. I tend to use them both in conjunction. Now, while that's going on down here, we've got a few things going on in the percussion department. We've got a soft boom and also a few bass drum notes. And then the build. So these work in conjunction with the timpani. If I add the timpani in as well. And it's slightly to give the kind of feeling of just a very loose kind of time, just a kind of drifting sensation until things really kick in. And when we do get things kicking in, they are introduced by these fantastic swells. And I will just play these to you together so you can hear them all together. I've got 3 different lengths of recorded swells here to choose from, and these are just the long ones. They're very, very useful. There's just a different sound that you get when you use a pre-recorded swell. So we've given 3 different lengths here, so you can kind of tailor them to the exact use requirement. And I've added in a little bit of kind of brass marcato, and this on its own, it's really just, it's down there underneath. It's not intended to be kind of very punchy. It's just a kind of a low thing that brings the swell in. So what happens when it kicks in? Let's play from the swell. Okay, so there's a couple of different things going on here. There's a high string spiccato pattern. And I've got this very, very definitely kind of punching through. I've actually done a small tweak here on the tightness control. And this usually sits in a kind of good balancing place between having enough of the kind of the start of the note, the sound of the bow as it starts to move against the string, bringing in the note, and also not being kind of too late that it's quite hard to play. Now for this particular part, I wanted it to sound slightly more aggressive and slightly more like it's really attacking the note. So I just cut in a tiny bit into the tightness of the note. Now you can also make these parts much looser. So just to give you a demonstration, so you can see where we're at now. We're at around about 80%, and that sounds like this. But if we pull that down to maybe 23%, now you can see that not only do you get the natural start of the note slightly more fullness, and that works for playing a slightly slower part, you also feel it feels slightly slower to play on the keyboard because there's a little bit more of a lag before the actual note kicks in. And it's still, you can still do these kind of parts, but it's that much harder to play. And actually that's not quite the sound that I want. I wanted this to be much more aggressive. So we dial it back up roughly where we were. And you can hear now that you've got that very much more cut sound at the beginning of the note. It's really on the bow. It really sounds like it's, we're really chopping those notes out. Now on the low strings, if we have a look here as well, you can see that I've not quite gone quite as far. I've just put it up maybe 25% or something like that. And that sounds like this. And if we played the part, with the, well, let's put it back in the middle where it sits usually. So it sounds good, but actually I just wanted that slightly more hard front on the note. So putting those all together, I just like that sound. So one of the things that you'll notice as we go through this piece is that I'm not being too kind of precise where it comes to how many players have you got, how are you going to divide them up. I'm really just going for sound on this. I'm allowing myself to kind of paint with the colours that I've got and not really worry too much about whether I'm being very precisely accurate to how I would orchestrate this if it was going to be played by real players. I'd probably change a few of the things, but that's the luxury that we've got when we're just kind of working with samples and we're just trying to create a sound world. It doesn't, as long as you feel it sounds good to you, then you don't have to worry too much if it's not going to be played by live players. So I've got this little section here, which is just a kind of colourful little accent towards the end of this bar, and it's just being duplicated with the brass and with the percussion. So if you have a listen to that on its own, and it's really just a little fun accent in the context of everything else. So you see I'm playing this kind of declamatory brass part on the trumpets, and then I've got the trombones with the low brass going as well. And it's a kind of two-part thing. If we just have a listen to it on its own. So you can hear that where I'm using the longs, I've got that pull down and then back up again. So it gives me the feeling of holding back and then it's kind of swelling to the end of the note, which sounds really great. And what I've decided to do here is I've decided to use the tenutos and marcatos to play the first couple of notes, because I wanted them to have that kind of placed and separated feel. And you've got the really useful thing about having those two different lengths are of tenuto and then the marcato, is that it gives you the shape of the attack of the note is kind of correct for that kind of note length. So it gives you a really useful extra expressiveness in the way that you want to play these separated out notes. So let's have a look at what's going on with the bass drums, the toms, and these two snares, which I've positioned left and right just to give us a feeling of kind of question and answer going on throughout this section. Okay, so you get the idea. Now, this is the kind of core of the orchestral sound. There are a couple of elements in this demo which I've used, which are not from Abbey Road 1. So I wanted to have just a hint of a kind of hybrid feel to this. It's not mixed very high. It's not like a really hybrid track. It's mostly the orchestral stuff and the orchestral percussion. But I did want just a few little bits and pieces of programmed stuff in here. And I'll show you the whole lot, actually. So we've got this hi-hat from the free Labs drums, and that sounds like this. Now you can see that the other bits we've got going on down here, we've got rim shot. Again, this is from the free Labs kit, which sounds like this. I've just put a short plate reverb on that. I've added a slightly higher rim shot from the free Logic drum kit. Put in, because I'm a child of the 80s, a little bit of this sound which will be immediately recognisable to any of you of a certain vintage. I've got a bass drum in here. This is just a basic TR-808 sample. You can find these anywhere. Really useful. And that's got the two of my favourite key 808 sounds is just the tight bass drum, and then one that's kind of slightly more of a note. Finally, I've got three things in here from one of my favourite synths, and that is the Zebra synth from Yuhi. Really, really fantastic instrument. And I've got two parts which are just playing these kind of sequenced type thing, which you can hear here. Fairly straightforward. And then last but not least, I've got a slightly longer sound, and this is from Hans's brilliant library that he did with Yuhi, which is the Dark Zebra. A fantastic set of presets on there, and that sounds like this. Now this is just to add a little bit of colour. I'm going to play it without any of that stuff, and then I'm going to pop that stuff back in so that you can very clearly hear what it's contributing to the overall sound. Okay, let's add in the electronic bits first, the kit. So just giving a tiny touch of programming feel in the background. And then when we add in our little bass synth here, we get this. So let's take a look at something which I'm doing here as we've got to this section, and that is doubling some of the instruments. So first up, we've got this phrase which I've put on the high strings and also on the low woods. Just check this out. So the low woods split away and go back to their kind of traditional part towards the end. But if we look at the answering phrase, there we go. So I think I've selected everything that I used there. So just have a quick listen to that. In fact, I'll play the way that the woodwinds, the high woodwinds come in. is they play a kind of background chordal part and then they jump over to double up this answering melody. And then jumping off at the end to allow other stuff to take over. So you can see here we've got our next kind of phrase here being doubled up with the horns, the high strings and the trumpets, and that sounds like this. Now, a couple of little useful things here. Obviously, I'm still riding the dynamics and I'm riding the expression just to get every single thing that I play in. I want to have that feeling of expression. I'll show you on the horns here. And just shaping that stuff like that, shaping the dynamic that you're using, but also adding in that expression control just to give you that extra little ability to control the volume, the kind of power of the note. That gives you those two elements, which I feel enables you to make really expressive musical phrases. And it's really important to do this on every single individual part. I always try and play each part in and play it with a proper musical line and musical phrase. I try and put myself in the mind of the musician playing that part. And then I try to make sure that I've got an overall musical intention across the orchestra which is consistent. So it's no good having the high strings emoting over a particular part of the phrase while the trumpets are really down low and doing something else, and then they leap up for the next bit. That doesn't give you, especially if they're all playing the same part, that really doesn't give you any consistency. So when you look into the way that I'm phrasing things, you know, if you look at the MIDI data down here, you'll see that there tends to be a kind of pattern to it. They tend to sort of rise and fall in the same kind of way. Another thing that you notice is that at the end of that, when I get to the end of that part, I'm trying to play idiomatically differently for the strings and the brass. So whereas the strings really carry on their kind of thing to the end of the note and keep it quite full, and you can see that they're kind of here in the MIDI data, I'm allowing the brass, they've got to the end of this part, they've really played it out in the middle. So I'm allowing them to hit the last note and then just drop away in dynamic slightly quicker than the violins do, and it gives a nice effect. So just check that out again. And I just think that sounds really nice and natural. It gives you you're getting a feeling of depth and colour and things changing even within this one tiny little very simple part. There's a kind of musical movement, and while everything else is going on and you're hearing other things happening, this is giving you the feeling that there's something musical going on, and that's really what we're trying to communicate all the time. In every piece that I do, I try to make sure that there's some kind of emotional message getting through. So what happens after this section? So let's solo all of the orchestral percussion. In this section, it's kind of like a percussion break, and I just wanted to give them a moment so that we could hear what they can do. So this is all of our orchestral percussion here. There's none of the electro stuff at the bottom playing. So let's have a listen to that. Okay, and then if we add in the parts that I've put in for the woodwinds and brass as well, that sounds like this. And actually, if we just check out that doubling up here, again, the trumpets and the xylophone, another thing I really like, something that Bernard Herrmann did a lot, a really fantastic colour that he used a lot. And again, you know, just looking at my playing here, you can see that I've played it in and tried to get the accents right, but I wouldn't worry about going in. You know, if I needed to just zoom in quickly to this and fix a couple of things if I overplayed something. I won't kind of murder it though, so I'm not going to quantize it into submission, not this particular part, because it doesn't really need that kind of thing. I'm judicious with my use of quantization, so I will pull in parts that are very, very metronomic and part of the kind of rhythm track of the orchestra. Things like maybe those very tight spiccato strings and things like that will have some quantization on, really, so that there's a kind of an anchor that holds the whole thing together. If you haven't got the whole orchestra playing at the same time in a live situation, then you have to create the anchor yourself. The thing that would normally kind of settle and where everybody would rely on certain sections of the orchestra to drive the overall rhythm forward. You've got to do that yourself, and you're not going to be able to get a sense of ensemble when you're playing in each part separately. So I don't worry about using a bit of quantization. That's absolutely fine. But for example, on this part, I very deliberately haven't, in order that it sounds as natural as possible. It doesn't need to be really nailed down, and this kind of part would sound slightly loose, slightly out off the grid, if you like, because of the nature of having to play those really fast notes. It just wouldn't be tight, so it helps it sound a little bit more realistic as well. So let's check out the percussion break going into this little transitional bridge and then into our kind of middle section of the piece. So what's going on here? Well, it's really simple. This is, something that's kind of inspired from my subconscious by, pretty obviously, by a kind of Jerry Goldsmith type of delay thing going on in the percussion. But also you've got these high strings. So the high strings are in octaves here. We just look at that. And they're just playing this very, very beautiful, slow, languorous kind of part. Actually split into octaves there. So, and then underneath that we've got this kind of very gentle movement in the trem strings. I'll play that on its own. So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm using the dynamic, the modulation control to give me those little dynamic waves and also a bit of expression just to give a little bit of kind of feeling of movement back and forth. In the high strings as well, again, you can see those curves there, really kind of going for it. If we play all of these parts together. So you can see, it's all about the musicality. It's all about getting those kind of that feeling of swell and, kind of tension and release and all that kind of stuff. And also, it's a nice touch to start and then to split into octaves for the second part of that phrase. What's happening in the low strings? Well, we've got our trems going on as well in the low strings to give us a little bit of colour, but also I'm using the pizzicatos down the bottom. Now, if I was orchestrating this for a live performance, then what I would do is I would just have the violas doing this kind of trem part at the top and the cellos and basses doing the pizzicato underneath. But it sounds rather lovely together. Now the other thing that you'll see is that I'm pulling the timing around a little bit, and if I go on to my quantization settings for this, just to show you what I'm doing there, you can see that for the tremolo part, I'm pulling that in a little bit. I've got 76% strength on the quantization, and I'm pulling that into the note values that I'm actually using. And when we go down to this section of the pits, the quantization is off completely. And that's because I really wanted to pull it around. I wanted to just fall slightly late on the first beat sometimes, and then just maybe pull it in slightly, on the third beat, just to give a feeling of kind of movement and a kind of, what's the expression from my old physics lessons? It's a kind of feeling of inertia. That's the word. It's a feeling of inertia. So there is a kind of sense when you have the cellos, and especially the basses, they obviously are very, very capable of playing right on top of the beat and absolutely fast, accurate stuff. But one of the really beautiful things about the way that the whole orchestra kind of breathes is that sometimes these lower instruments, there's a fantastic kind of looseness that happens sometimes down the bottom, and I wanted to get that feel into this as well. Now we go into a little bit of a key change in the next section, but then also there's a kind of transitional moment as well where something is going to happen, you're waiting to see what happens, and then we bang back in with the opening idea. So let's have a quick listen to that. Now, before I go on, you can see here that I'm orchestrating this so that there are different things here. For example, between the low woods and the low brass. The low brass come in a tiny bit later. It's a tiny, tiny effect. But it's that kind of thing that really adds a nice colour, I feel. So, sorry I interrupted. Here we go. So you'll see that I've added some little bits here. So I'm adding some touches of colour and orchestration to make it different from the opening. And one of the things here that I've added are these tiny little swells with the full orchestra. It sounds so good. Sound like this. Again, it's a little colour. I'm not worried about how many players are sat there or anything like that. I'm just making it sound pleasing to my ear personally. We've got these little bits and bobs from the electro stuff coming back in, and in fact we had one tiny little bit, my spelling leaves something to be desired. We had something really interesting happening here. Let me show you what's going on here. So again, this is the Labs free drum kit, so make sure you download that if you haven't already. It's got some really great useful sounds in, and what I'm doing here, I'm using a couple of different things. So I've got this doing a little bit of a kind of delayed thing going on, and I'm sending that to a bit of reverb as well. But I've also got the snares from the percussion section here, and I'm treating them in a kind of an interesting way as well. So I've got a really quite an extreme EQ profile on there to really change the sound and hone it into the sound I hear in my head, which is this kind of almost kind of clicky snare sound. And then sending it to some outboard with a bit of delay here. This is a rather lovely little delay plugin from Waves. And then outboard, I've got my my lovely TC6000, which is giving me a bit of nice kind of bloom on the sort of hall sound on the background. But you could use anything for that. I mean, that's any kind of standard hall reverb would be great for that. So the other thing, what's going on here, when we really kind of start to kick in with our orchestral percussion, let's just have a quick listen to this. So you can hear I'm really, really stretching the bounds of what what you should do with your traditional orchestral stuff. I've got these ribbon crashers and I just love these sounds, but I'm using them in a couple of different ways. So the first channel is just a very, very straight, that's just what you might expect, very standard. But what I've done is I've used the same sound and I've put it through just a bit of reverb here and panned them left and right. And I'm doing a rhythm that turns into an offbeat. And you can see the way that I've done that, super, super simple. If I zoom in a little bit there, you can see that I've just taken the same part, which has got a nice accent, and I've put it on 16th later. So my part, if I just play the first of those, it sounds like this. So you can hear a really clear accent there. Now what sounds really lovely is when you add the same thing, but with the second accent just offset by a 16th, you get this effect. And I just like it. It's a little bit more unusual than just slapping a delay on it and panning that over the other side. I suppose you could get this sound by using a delay with one single repeat, but actually just as simple to take the part and pan it over there. And I really love the way that sounds. It's really nice. Just for full disclosure, so you can hear what our electro band are doing at the same time. And again, this is all really simple, straightforward stuff. It's all either the kind of bits from the free labs stuff that you can download off our website, or it's kind of, stuff that you can find anywhere. Logic's free sounds, some great sounds in the kit section of that. Okay, that's a nice little touch that I put in, just having that little low string spiccato, doing a kind of slightly different chordal part. Instead of its usual thing, it goes like this. And in context, okay, so just a very quick look at that final section. Let's look at our orchestral percussion in this section, and they sound like this. And again, I'm using that fantastic kind of alternating snares. So I've got this snare on that side and then these snares on this side. So using that kind of interplay, we've got these fantastic punchy sounds. The toms are absolutely wonderful. Really, really great. Very, very punchy. Bass drums, some cool stuff going on there. And finally, using the things like the xylophone to punch out the kind of impact sounds. And I find that a lot of the time when you've got these kind of things going on, it's about trying to line up where you want your impacts to be, and then you can make stuff sound bigger by the way that you orchestrate it. So having the xylophone doubling the kind of impact of each beginning of the beat, or maybe every other beat or something like that, spreading things out, having the low woodwinds really punching out down the bottom, the high woodwinds. Don't neglect any part of your orchestra. Keep kind of piling on more and more sort of brass and strings, thinking that that's going to make it bigger. It's really, a lot of it is about the kind of color balance, the width of the color balance, and also just to parts like with these high strings here is about having that sort of that kind of inbuilt accent in the way that you've written the part. So those high notes are just going to punch out because they're higher, and on that particular instrument, putting that higher stuff up gives you a kind of more of a dynamic sound. It gives you a louder sound. Conversely, with the low winds and the low brass, if we look at the low brass down here, you can hear where the money is. That's where you need to be aiming for your impact. So with all of the instruments, again, this is all that kind of thing about feeling your way around and trying to put yourself in the mind of the player, playing these things idiomatically. It's about working out, okay, where does this instrument, if I want a loud part, where does this instrument sound the loudest? Where does it really, is it able to really play out? And if I don't want that, then, and I want a kind of quieter section, if we look at the horns, for example, with down here, even if we push the volume up, you can kind of feel that there's a bit of resistance to really kind of punching out down there. Now we can play quietly up here, but there's a little bit of a feeling of uncertainty, and this is tricky, and that's a great sound for, but when you really want to punch something out, then you go to the top of the range and you really, get the players to play nice and loud. And that kind of idiomatic part writing will just, all of these little tiny things, these little 1-2% all over the place, if you're constantly doing those things, then when you get to the overall thing, it just makes such a fantastic impact on everything. So thanks very much for watching my little analysis of how I put the track together. I hope there's been some useful little bits of information in here. If you've got any questions, leave the questions below, and I will endeavour to try and help out with it, with anything that you're interested in knowing more about. But beyond that, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.